From a star who got shot in the butt to a controversial Buckwheat episode that sparked national debate, The Parenthood packed more bizarre behind-the-scenes secrets than most 90s sitcoms. This seemingly wholesome family show hid everything from last-minute cancellation saves to cast members mysteriously disappearing between seasons, plus Robert Townsend's wild fantasy sequences that bordered on the surreal. Fact 1. Original title controversy. Before The Parenthood became the name that viewers would remember for 5 seasons, the show was originally going to carry a much more provocative title that directly challenged a classic piece of American television history. Robert Townsend and his co-creators Andrew Nichols and Daryl Vickers had initially planned to call their family sitcom Father Knows Nothing, which served as a deliberate and pointed parody of the beloved 1950s series Father Knows Best. The original title choice wasn't just a clever play on words, but represented a fundamental shift in how television portrayed American fathers, particularly African-American fathers navigating the complexities of modern family life. While the classic Father Knows Best had presented Jim Anderson as the wise, all-knowing patriarch who always had the right answers for his family's problems, Townsend's vision was refreshingly honest about the reality that most parents, especially fathers thrust into new roles, often felt completely out of their depth. Father Knows Nothing would have immediately signaled to audiences that this wasn't going to be another sanitized family show where dad had all the solutions. Instead, it promised a more realistic portrayal of parenting, where Robert Peterson would stumble through raising 4 children, while his wife Jerry returned to law school, leaving him to figure out everything from teenage dating drama to elementary school homework battles. However, somewhere during the development process, the creative team decided to soften the approach and chose The Parenthood instead, which maintained the urban setting reference while avoiding the potentially controversial implications of the original title. The change reflected the show's ultimate tone, which balanced humor about parental uncertainty with genuine warmth and family values, making it more palatable for the WB network's launch strategy in 1995. Fact 2. WB Network Launch Savior. When the WB network made its debut on January 18, 1995, the entire future of the fledgling television network rested on the shoulders of just 4 sitcoms, and The Parenthood was one of those make-or-break shows that had to prove the network could survive in the competitive world of broadcast television. The network's ambitious Wednesday night 2-hour comedy block featured The Parenthood, alongside The Wayans Brothers, Unhappily Ever After, and a short-lived show called Muscle that most viewers have completely forgotten about today. This wasn't just another show getting picked up by an established network with dozens of other programs to fall back on if something failed. The WB was betting its entire identity and financial future on these 4 comedies, making every single episode crucial for the network's survival during those early months, when advertisers and viewers were still figuring out whether this new network deserved a spot on their television dials. The Parenthood carried extra weight in this launch strategy because it represented the WB's commitment to African-American programming at a time when other networks were pulling back from diverse casting and storylines. The network executives were essentially staking their reputation on shows like The Parenthood and The Wayans Brothers to attract viewers who felt underserved by the major networks, while Unhappily Ever After was supposed to capture the audience that enjoyed dysfunctional family comedies. The pressure was enormous because there was no safety net of established hit shows to keep the network afloat if these 4 comedies bombed with audiences. Every rating point mattered, and every week that The Parenthood managed to hold on to viewers was another step toward proving that the WB could carve out its own space in the television landscape that was dominated by the big 3 networks. Fact 3. Kenny Blank's mysterious exit. One of the most jarring changes in The Parenthood happened between seasons 3 and 4, when Kenny Blank, who played the responsible eldest son Michael Peterson, simply vanished from the show, with barely any explanation for his sudden departure. For 3 full seasons, Michael had been a central character in the Peterson family dynamic, serving as the voice of reason among the siblings, and often acting as a bridge between his parents' expectations and his younger siblings' antics, making his abrupt exit all the more puzzling for loyal viewers. When Season 4 premiered in 1997, fans expecting to see Michael return for his senior year storylines were instead met with a casual, almost throwaway mention that he had gone off to college, as if one of the main characters could just disappear without any proper send-off or meaningful explanation. The show didn't even bother to create a special episode about Michael leaving for college, which would have been a natural and emotional storyline for a family sitcom that had spent 3 years developing his character and his relationships with everyone in the household. What made Kenny Blank's exit even more mysterious was that it happened at the beginning of the 1997 to 1998 season, right when the show was facing its own uncertain future with network executives. Instead of keeping the cast stable during this crucial period, the producers chose to write out a popular character and replace him with Tyrone Dorzell Burton's character, T.K. Anderson, a troubled teenager who brought a completely different energy to the family dynamic. To this day, the exact reasons behind Kenny Blank's departure remain unclear, with no official statements from either the actor or the show's producers explaining whether it was a creative decision, a contract dispute, or simply a case of an actor wanting to pursue other opportunities while the show was still running. Fact 4. Last-minute cancellation save. In May of 1998, The Parenthood experienced one of the most dramatic behind-the-scenes roller coaster rides in television history when the WB network officially announced that the show was being canceled after 4 seasons, only to completely reverse course and grant it a last-minute reprieve that would keep the Peterson family on the air for one final season. This wasn't just a simple change of heart from network executives, but rather a bizarre scheduling decision that would leave fans waiting an entire year to see how their favorite family story would conclude. The cancellation announcement had seemed final, with industry publications reporting that The Parenthood was among the casualties of the WB's programming shakeup as the network tried to find its footing in an increasingly competitive television landscape. Cast members and crew had already begun making plans for their next projects, assuming that Robert Peterson's adventures in fatherhood had come to an end after 4 seasons of family comedy and heartfelt moments. However, just when everyone thought the show was finished, the WB executives made the unusual decision to order 13 additional episodes for what they called a mid-season replacement slot, giving The Parenthood an unexpected 5th and final season. The catch was that this reprieve came with an extraordinarily long delay that left viewers hanging for months without any new episodes. The final season didn't actually air until May 23, 1999, creating a gap of almost exactly 1 full year between the end of Season 4 and the beginning of Season 5. This meant that fans had to wait through an entire television season before they could find out what happened next to the Peterson family, making it one of the longest hiatuses in sitcom history between seasons of the same show. Fact 5. The Buckwheat controversy. One of the most talked-about episodes in The Parenthood history aired on February 21, 1996, when the show tackled the sensitive subject of racial stereotypes through an episode titled "I'm Ote, You're Ote," that would generate discussions far beyond the typical family sitcom audience. The controversy began when 8-year-old Nicholas Peterson, played by Curtis Williams, announced to his shocked parents that he wanted to portray Buckwheat from The Little Rascals for his school's Black History Month presentation, rather than choosing a more traditional figure like Martin Luther King Jr. or Thurgood Marshall. Robert and Jerry Peterson's initial horror at their son's choice reflected the concerns of many African-American parents who worried about perpetuating harmful stereotypes that had plagued black performers for decades. Buckwheat, originally played by William Thomas Jr. in the 1930s and 40s, was known for his almost incomprehensible speech patterns and childlike behavior that many critics viewed as demeaning representations of African American children during an era when such portrayals were unfortunately common in Hollywood. However, the episode took an unexpected turn when Nicholas appeared at the school assembly dressed in full buckwheat costume, complete with the character's signature pigtails and overalls, and began speaking in the familiar broken English that had made the character famous. Just when viewers and the fictional audience thought they were witnessing a troubling display of internalized racism, Nicholas removed his wig mid-presentation and delivered a surprisingly mature explanation about how black actors during Buckwheat's era had to accept stereotypical roles because those were the only opportunities available to them in the film industry. The episode concluded with Nicholas arguing that these early performers, despite the problematic nature of their characters, deserved recognition for paving the way for future generations of African American actors, who would eventually have access to more diverse and dignified roles in television and movies. Fact 6. Robert gets shot in the butt. In one of the most unexpectedly dramatic storylines that The Parenthood ever attempted, the two-part episode titled Hood Sweet Hood featured Robert Peterson getting shot in what has to be one of the most unusual injury locations in sitcom history. While the family and viewers initially feared that Robert had suffered a life-threatening head wound during the shooting incident, the reality turned out to be both less serious and considerably more embarrassing when doctors revealed that the bullet had actually struck him in the buttocks rather than anywhere near his head or other vital organs. The shooting incident itself was part of the show's attempt to address real urban violence that many families in communities like Harlem faced on a regular basis, but the decision to have Robert get shot in such an undignified location created an odd mix of serious social commentary and unintentional comedy that left viewers unsure whether they should be worried or amused. The writers were clearly trying to tackle important issues about neighborhood safety and the random nature of street violence, but having the main character get shot in the rear end made it difficult for audiences to take the situation as seriously as the show seemed to want them to. What made the storyline even more bizarre was that despite the relatively minor nature of a buttock wound, Robert still ended up in a coma, not because of the gunshot itself, but because he hit his head on the sidewalk when he fell after being shot. This meant that the show's dramatic hospital scenes and emotional family moments were all triggered by Robert tripping and hitting his head after getting shot in the bottom, creating one of the most convoluted cause-and-effect medical situations in television history. The two-part episode tried to balance the serious consequences of urban violence with the inherently ridiculous nature of Robert's specific injury, resulting in a storyline that audiences still remember decades later for all the wrong reasons. Fact 7. Suzanne Douglas's musical background. Long before Suzanne Douglas became known to television audiences as the wise and strong-willed Jerry Peterson on The Parenthood, she had already established herself as a serious musician with formal training that most actors could never dream of achieving. Douglas held a master's degree in music from the prestigious Manhattan School of Music, one of the most competitive and respected conservatories in the United States, where she originally focused on developing her skills as a trained vocalist, rather than pursuing acting as her primary career path. The Manhattan School of Music has produced some of the world's most accomplished classical and contemporary musicians, making Douglas's educational background far more impressive than most viewers ever realized while watching her navigate family life as Robert Peterson's wife. Her advanced musical training meant that she understood complex musical theory, had years of rigorous vocal technique instruction, and possessed the kind of disciplined artistic foundation that typically leads to careers in opera houses, concert halls, or recording studios rather than television sound stages. What makes Douglas's transition from music to acting even more remarkable is that she didn't abandon her musical roots entirely, but instead brought that same level of artistic dedication and technical precision to her acting performances throughout her career. Her musical background likely contributed to her natural sense of timing, rhythm, and emotional expression that made her such a compelling presence on screen, even though most Parenthood fans had no idea they were watching someone who could have easily pursued a completely different career in professional music. Douglas's journey from the practice rooms and performance halls of Manhattan School of Music to the family-friendly comedy of The Parenthood represents one of the more unusual career transitions in television history, showing how artistic training in one discipline can unexpectedly enhance success in a completely different field of entertainment. Fact 8. Fantasy sequences galore. One of the most distinctive and unusual elements that set The Parenthood apart from other family sitcoms was Robert Peterson's vivid imagination, which manifested in elaborate fantasy sequences that occurred so frequently that television analysis websites like TV Tropes noted they happened once an episode throughout the show's entire 5-season run. These weren't just brief daydreams or simple cutaway gags like other comedies might use, but full-blown imaginative scenarios where Robert Townsend's character would envision himself in completely bizarre and often surreal situations that had nothing to do with the reality of his family life in Harlem. The fantasy sequences could transport Robert Peterson anywhere from historical settings to science fiction scenarios, allowing the show's writers and Townsend himself to showcase creative storytelling that went far beyond the typical boundaries of a domestic family comedy. Robert might imagine himself as a medieval knight defending his daughter's honor, a Wild West sheriff dealing with troublemaking kids, or even a superhero saving the day when faced with seemingly impossible parenting challenges that required non-traditional solutions. What made these sequences particularly memorable was how they often reflected Robert's anxieties and hopes as a father, trying to navigate the complexities of raising 4 children in the modern world. Instead of simply talking through his concerns like characters on other sitcoms might do, Robert's active imagination would create entire alternate realities where he could work through his parenting dilemmas in settings that ranged from the historically epic to the completely absurd. These fantasy elements gave The Parenthood a unique visual and narrative style that distinguished it from more straightforward family comedies of the 1990s, allowing Robert Townsend to incorporate his background in sketch comedy and filmmaking into a traditional television format in ways that most other sitcom stars never attempted. Fact 9. Faison Love's Vanishing Act. In one of the most glaring examples of a character simply disappearing without any explanation in sitcom history, Faison Love's beloved character Wendell Wilcox completely vanished from The Parenthood during the 5th and final season, leaving viewers wondering what happened to Robert Peterson's best friend, who had been a central part of the show's dynamic for 4 full seasons. Wendell had been such an integral part of the Peterson family's daily life that young Nicholas once complained that Wendell spent more time at their house than he did at his own home, making his sudden absence all the more noticeable and confusing for longtime fans. Throughout the first 4 seasons, Wendell served as Robert's comedic sidekick and voice of questionable wisdom, often providing the kind of misguided advice that would lead to even more complicated situations for the Peterson family. His character had evolved from a simple recurring neighbor in Season 1 to a full main cast member who appeared in 67 episodes across Seasons 2 through 4, establishing himself as practically a member of the Peterson household with his own running gags and character development. When the delayed 5th season finally aired in 1999, viewers expecting to see Wendell's familiar face were instead introduced to Kelly Peterson, Robert's younger brother played by Kelly Perrine, who seemed to fill a similar comedic role without any acknowledgement of what had happened to Wendell or why he was no longer part of Robert's life. The show offered no farewell episode, no mention of Wendell moving away, and no explanation for why this character, who had been so important to the family's story, had simply ceased to exist. Faison Love had already established himself as a popular comedian through movies like Friday and BB's Kids, making his unexplained departure from The Parenthood even more puzzling since he was clearly still active in the entertainment industry during that time period. Fact 10. TK's real-life troubles. In a case of life imitating art in the most unfortunate way possible, Tyrone Dorzell Burton, who played the streetwise troubled teenager TK Anderson on The Parenthood, found himself in real legal trouble a decade after the show ended when he was arrested by the Los Angeles Police Department in 2009 for selling bootleg DVDs. The irony was particularly striking because Burton's character on the show had been specifically written as a young man trying to escape his troubled past and find stability with the Peterson family, making his later brush with the law seem like an unfortunate echo of the very storylines the show had used to explore themes of redemption and second chances. T.K. Anderson had joined the Peterson household during the show's 4th season as a replacement for the departed Michael Peterson character, bringing with him a backstory that included a drug-addicted mother who had abandoned him and a history of living on the streets that was supposed to contrast with the middle-class stability that Robert and Jerry provided. Burton's portrayal of TK was meant to show how a supportive family environment could help a troubled youth turn his life around, with many episodes focusing on the character's gradual integration into the Peterson family and his efforts to leave his difficult past behind. The 2009 arrest for selling bootleg DVDs represented a relatively minor offense in the grand scheme of criminal activity, but it nonetheless highlighted how some child actors struggle to find steady work and financial stability after their television careers end. Burton had appeared in 33 episodes across the show's final 2 seasons, and after The Parenthood concluded, he had only managed to secure a few guest appearances on other shows like That's So Raven, and some roles in independent films before apparently turning to illegal DVD sales to make ends meet. Fact 11. Reagan Gomez Preston's teen marriage. While most 19-year-olds are focused on college, career decisions, or simply figuring out what they want to do with their lives, Reagan Gomez Preston made one of the biggest commitments possible when she married model Dwayne Turrentine on November 10, 1999, just months after The Parenthood wrapped its 5-season run, and while she was still a teenager navigating the transition from child star to adult actress. The timing of her wedding was particularly notable because it happened during a period when most young actors are trying to establish their post-childhood careers and prove they can take on more mature roles in Hollywood. Dwayne Turrentine wasn't just any model, but was also a member of the hip-hop duo called Quo, which added an interesting musical element to their relationship that connected to the entertainment industry world that Gomez Preston had been part of since she was 14 years old. The couple had actually been dating since 1995, meaning their relationship had developed and grown throughout Reagan's entire tenure on The Parenthood, with Turrentine supporting her through some of the most formative years of her acting career. What made their early marriage even more remarkable was that it proved to be lasting and successful, defying the typical Hollywood statistics about young celebrity marriages that often end in divorce within a few years. Reagan and Dwayne went on to have 2 children together, a daughter named Scarlett Annette Turrentine, born in 2007, and a son named Tiger Attila Turrentine, born in 2011, creating a stable family life that allowed Reagan to continue her acting and voiceover career while maintaining the personal relationships that had begun during her teenage years on television. The marriage represented a successful transition from her time as Zaria Peterson to her adult life as Reagan Gomez Preston. Fact 12. The Christmas Cancellation Episode. One of the most bizarre and memorable Christmas episodes in sitcom history occurred during The Parenthood's 2nd season, with an episode titled The Man Who Cancelled Christmas, where Robert Peterson made the drastic decision to literally cancel Christmas for his entire family because he was fed up with his children's greedy attitudes and materialistic behavior during what was supposed to be a season of gratitude and giving. This wasn't just Robert threatening to take away presents or reducing the holiday celebration, but rather a complete and total cancellation of Christmas that left the Peterson children without any of the traditions, decorations, or festivities they had been looking forward to all year. The episode took an even stranger turn when the disappointed Peterson children went to bed on Christmas Eve and were visited by a pair of elves who looked exactly like Robert and Wendell, creating one of the most surreal sequences in the show's entire run. These Robert and Wendell elves weren't just vaguely similar to the main characters, but were actually played by Robert Townsend and Faison Love themselves, dressed in full elf costumes complete with pointed ears and traditional holiday outfits that made for an incredibly weird visual experience. The elf versions of Robert and Wendell appeared to teach the children important lessons about the true meaning of Christmas, and to help them understand why their father had felt compelled to take such extreme measures in response to their greedy behavior. Rather than simply lecturing the kids about materialism, the show created this elaborate fantasy sequence where the familiar faces of their father and his best friend could address their selfish attitudes from the perspective of Christmas magic. This episode perfectly demonstrated how The Parenthood was willing to embrace completely absurd storytelling elements to deliver its family-friendly messages about values, responsibility, and the importance of appreciating what you already have, rather than constantly demanding more. Fact 13. Curtis Williams's disappearing act. Of all the child actors who appeared on The Parenthood, none has managed to maintain as complete and thorough a distance from the entertainment industry and public life as Curtis Williams, who played the precocious and often troublemaking middle child Nicholas Peterson for all 5 seasons of the show, before seemingly vanishing from Hollywood entirely in the early 2000s. Unlike many former child stars who either continue acting into adulthood, make occasional appearances at reunion events, or at least maintain some connection to their former careers through interviews or social media, Williams appears to have made a deliberate choice to completely step away from the spotlight and live a private life. After The Parenthood ended in 1999, Williams managed to secure a few guest appearances on popular shows like Moesha, Malcolm in the Middle, and That's So Raven, which suggested that he was still interested in continuing his acting career and had the industry connections necessary to book roles on successful television programs. However, according to his listing on the Internet Movie Database, his last credited acting appearance occurred in the early 2000s, after which he seems to have stopped pursuing entertainment work entirely. What makes Curtis Williams's disappearance particularly notable in today's social media age is that he appears to have no visible presence on any of the major platforms like Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, or TikTok, making him nearly impossible for fans to locate or follow. This complete absence from digital platforms is extremely rare for anyone who was once part of a popular television show, especially someone who spent their formative years in the public eye, and might be expected to have some nostalgia or connection to that period of their life. His deliberate privacy has made him one of the most mysterious figures from the show's cast, leaving fans to wonder what he's been doing for the past 2 decades. Fact 14. Robert Townsend's SNL rejection. Years before Robert Townsend became the creator, star, and driving force behind The Parenthood, he experienced one of the most significant career disappointments of his early professional life when he auditioned for Saturday Night Live in 1980, and was ultimately rejected by the show's producers in favor of another young comedian named Eddie Murphy. This rejection happened during a crucial period in Townsend's career when he was still trying to establish himself as a performer and was looking for the kind of high-profile platform that could launch him into national prominence the way Saturday Night Live had done for so many other comedians. The 1980 to 1981 season of Saturday Night Live was particularly important because the show was in transition and looking for fresh talent to revitalize its cast, making it an especially competitive audition process that attracted ambitious comedians from across the country who recognized this as a potentially career-defining opportunity. Eddie Murphy was also relatively unknown at the time, having started his comedy career just a few years earlier, which meant that both he and Townsend were competing for what was essentially the same spot as young, up-and-coming African-American comedians, with similar energy and comedic sensibilities. Of course, Eddie Murphy's selection for Saturday Night Live launched him into superstardom and led to his legendary characters like Mr. Robinson's Neighborhood and his impressions of celebrities like James Brown, while also setting up his transition into blockbuster movies like 48 Ursers and Trading Places. Meanwhile, Townsend took a different path that eventually led him to create groundbreaking films like Hollywood Shuffle and The 5 Heartbeats, before ultimately finding television success with The Parenthood more than a decade later, proving that sometimes rejection from one opportunity can lead to completely different but equally meaningful creative achievements. Fact 15. The show's delayed final season. In what stands as one of the most unusual scheduling decisions in television history, The Parenthood subjected its loyal viewers to an agonizing wait when the show's 5th and final season was placed on an extended hiatus that lasted nearly an entire year, with the new episodes not airing until May 23, 1999, creating a gap that left fans wondering if the Peterson family would ever return to their television screens. This extraordinary delay meant that viewers who had watched the Season 4 finale in the spring of 1998 had to wait through an entire television season cycle before they could find out what happened next. Robert, Jerry, and their children, The hiatus was particularly frustrating because it came after the WB had already announced the show's cancellation and then reversed course to grant it a final 13-episode run, creating expectations that the concluding episodes would air in a timely manner to provide closure for the series. Instead, the network chose to hold these final episodes for what they termed a mid-season replacement slot, but then kept pushing back the actual air date as other programming priorities took precedence over wrapping up the Parenthood's storylines. During this lengthy delay, other family sitcoms came and went from the television landscape. New shows launched and were canceled, and the entire media environment shifted in ways that made the Parenthood feel like a relic from a different era by the time it finally returned. The delay also meant that the young actors in the cast had visibly aged during the hiatus, creating continuity issues that made the final season feel disconnected from the previous 4 years of the show. This extended gap between seasons 4 and 5 remains one of the longest documented delays in sitcom history, exceeding even the lengthy breaks that other shows have experienced due to strikes, production problems, or network changes.